have a bit of a short panel discussion where I'd like to ask you some questions that I prepared in advance, but also some questions that are coming up from the chat. Maybe to start with you, Bram, I see that in your presentation you really show how you have applied different types of systems thinking in your analysis in terms of connecting drivers, activities, and outcomes, studying those dynamics, looking at leverage points. Could you tell us a bit more about why you think it's useful to use that kind of systems thinking when analyzing food systems, and how it could help us to design interventions better?
Yeah, I think this relates a bit to what I was sharing in my last slide. I think and I think also it relates to what was being talked about, is that you're working in a very complex situation, and I think what resonates quite often is indeed this elephant, where a lot of people are saying, you know, we have different perspectives on the system, and we know different parts of the system, but it doesn't, you know, capture the whole picture. And I think what systems thinking helps both is that it helps you to get an overview of all different things that are important and that make up what's happening in the system, as well as it helps you to think through essentially what might be needed to realize systemic change. And I think that's really critical as reflection on development work, is that it's too often the case that we feel we didn't really, you know, change the situation, right? We might have improved some things a little bit. We might have, you know, changed the situation for some people, but there's always a risk that things sort of go back to the way they were. And I think that's why we really need a food systems perspective, or at least a food system lens in what we're doing. And it may not be possible for everyone to go through all these different steps, and it's quite a lengthy process if you want to really, you know, analyze a food system in depth. But I think the understanding that these systems are there and that they're happening means that it becomes more important to work together, right? You need to create partnerships with others to get that, you know, that elephant, to get that picture of what's happening with that elephant and the elephant in the room, and what's, you know, beyond, what's driving stakeholders in that.
Great, thanks, Bram, for that answer. I think indeed understanding the system also really through systems thinking really helps us to identify where in the system we need to change the dynamics, the behavior of the system, how the different system components interact in order to create different outcomes, no, of the system that we might find more desirable than the current ones. So yeah, great. Thanks for that answer. Helena, I wanted to ask you also, based on some of the questions we got in the chat, and there's a lot of discussion going on there. In your experience, how can you really make sure that food system analysis is not only an academic or exercise, or an analytic exercise, but it's really something that helps to shape policy, or it helps to shape concrete projects? And there's also a lot of chat in the chat about what is the role of involving stakeholders. So maybe you can say a bit about what is the role of involving stakeholders in also making sure that your food system analysis is useful?
Yeah, those are very valid questions. And I think the higher up you go in level, if you try to look at a national food system, or I saw somewhere even asking a question, can you do a global food system analysis? The more academic it becomes, right? So I think what I've heard from people who have also done work in this, the closer you get to the ground, so go to a community, a district, a town, and you invite the local players, the easier it is to get to action. And as you move up in scale, if you go to national level, then you end up often with a quite academic exercise indeed, and you talk about policies, and but you're less engaged with the people on the ground who are from day to day working in the processing or the trading or the markets and so on. So that would be my response to that. But I think For me, talking as an academic and a researcher, I know that my pitfall is to observe and to think that I know how things work. But as soon as I start talking to a policymaker or a farmer, I suddenly realize that there are different issues at play than what I can realize from a distance. So stakeholder engagement is crucial, also because someone was also commenting like that our policymakers are working in silos and different ministries. We see the same in industry, we see the same in research. It's so important to connect, to break those barriers, to really work together. Yeah, the other one that I still wanted to refer to is a comment from Sima Shivara saying, can we really achieve food system transformation? I'm not very optimistic because of the complexity and things are just getting worse. I share your feeling in that sense, but then I think, well, we don't have a choice. We start realizing that all these problems that we're facing, they're interconnected. So we cannot continue on the path that we were on, and we need to try to understand that complexity and how it interacts. It's the only way we can continue, even though what we see around us is not very encouraging, maybe, but it's even the more reason to say, well, we need to do things differently and we need to do them together. Yeah, so those were some thoughts from my side.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Helena, for those reflections. Maybe, Bram, I wanted to ask you, because I know that from your work at Foresight for Food, you're also involved in using some of this systems thinking and food system analysis and foresight also on at the national level in Jordan and in Kenya. So can you maybe reflect a bit on how you're using some of these tools there and how you are also involving stakeholders in making sure that those tools are used in a way that actually influences policy?
Yeah, nice. I think indeed, as Foresight for Food, we are supporting a number of countries, including indeed Jordan, Kenya, Uganda, Bangladesh, on sort of thinking through their national food system transformation pathways, which were generated throughout the Food System Summit. And what we try to do is to get different stakeholders in the room to talk about a number of different sort of steps in the process of saying, okay, how do we understand, first of all, how the current system looks like? Can we bring also a lot of evidence, first of all, to the table about what's happening with the current food system? Can we sort of widen that perspective from a range of different people? And can we also use the inputs and the perspective of different stakeholders together to get a good understanding of what's currently happening at a national level with these different food systems? But then we take them through a process, or we're facilitating a process where we're sort of exploring what this means also for the future of the food system. And that's when it becomes interesting, because often you find that if you have a complicated food system, you might get stuck in a situation that people say, okay, this is complicated. We don't know what the next step is. But when we try to explore then also what the future food system might look like and could look like, it becomes quite interesting, because then you get a sort of creative tension where people are saying, hold on, so if we're moving in this direction and sort of we have trends and drivers that are pointing in that way, is that something we would like to end up or not? And then you get a whole discussion going with different stakeholders about different scenarios, how those scenarios might look, what would be the implications of those scenarios. And that helps to open up a discussion about a transition that people might make. And I think that's also critical when we talk about transformation. It's really about a combination of transitions that are needed. And these traditions need to start moving now instead of that we're just waiting. And I think that's also what we try to facilitate in our discussions. And maybe just to give you a bit of an idea of different tools we are using, it doesn't have to be that complicated. So we use often rich picturing to get people to sit together and describe the food system and how it looks and the different relationships they see. It's about using 2x2 matrices to develop different types of scenarios and to get people talking about the food system and how it could look. And then we also use CLDs to get people to think through what are some of the underlying logics and the barriers and the bottlenecks to change that people see in their environment. And that also helps to get a discussion going about the food system and the future of it.
Great, Bram. Thanks for those reflections. in the chat, I see also some really interesting remarks, which are more about, isn't this a whole lot of work with a lot of resources that need to go into it? Is there a way in which we can do this kind of food system analysis over a shorter period with a limited budget, and would it still yield some interesting results? So how can we make it very practical, that in a way that we can use it within, for example, a project? Now, I think, Bram, you also gave an example of within your project how you did it. But Helena, what is your experience in how long does it actually take to do a good food system analysis? How many resources do you need to do it well? Can you reflect a bit on that?
Yeah, you can make it as big and as extensive as you want, but you don't have the time and the resources, and there's always a challenge. Keep it within certain boundaries. So boundaries is important. First of all, boundaries. What is your food system? How far do you go with your analysis? Be very much aware how much time and what capacity do you have, what are your resources. But what we try to do in that toolbox that I've been talking about is to also give you some ideas. What could you do if you don't have a lot of time or if you don't have many resources, but just by maybe bringing some people together for a day to reflect on what are the issues, what are some exercises you can do together, at least to pull out the information that people have, the knowledge that they have, try to get that on the table without having to do a 4-year research program, for example, because no one has, well, not many have the resources to do that. So I think the main message is, even if you don't have a lot of time or resources, at least talk to some of these stakeholders, listen to how they see what are the issues, what is driving certain actions, decisions, what is causing the problems. Try to gather that information, even if it's just by having some conversations, at least to get different perspectives. I saw somewhere in the comments, I don't know who it said, but maybe sometimes we think it's simple and I know the solution, so how do I know it's a wicked problem and whether I need a food system analysis? Well, maybe just start to 3-4 different people that are not in your line of work and ask them, what do you think is the problem here and what would you think would be a solution? And if their answers are very different to yours, try to get some more information and more stakeholders involved. But if they all give the same answer to yours, then maybe it's not a wicked problem indeed. But at least be open to different perspectives. That's what I would say, and be open to different answers and solutions.
Great, thanks for those reflections. I think that's very useful. Bram, do you have any more thoughts based on what's coming in the chat? I'm realizing there's a very active discussion going on a range of topics there.
No, I'm trying to follow the comments. It's going very fast. So, but I picked up an interesting one, which I felt was nice, because someone's saying, I think Yusra is saying, like, how do you decide when a solution is not working anymore, right? Like, how do you make that decision? And I think that's a super interesting one, because I think this is so fundamental to a lot of the work that we are doing and has been done on so many different fronts, right? So this is talking also about being critical about how you as an organization or as an individual are working with systems and with food systems, right? And I was thinking about one very powerful question that I came across when I was looking into systems thinking. And it's really about saying, okay, you need to reflect also on your own sort of role in sort of this system. And are you in fact, through your work, despite your best intentions, contributing to the system remaining the same, or are you actively indeed trying to change the way the system works? And I think this is very fundamental to both humanitarian as well as development work. And so the question is that you could ask yourself on deciding whether or not solutions are working is that why, and to really critically look at why have we not been able to achieve what we want to achieve, a specific goal, despite having been, doing the best efforts that we could in the past couple of years, and yet not realizing what we need to realize, right? So this is a fundamental question for a lot of organizations, I would say.
Great, Bram. Thanks a lot for those reflections. If you have any other questions that you would like to ask to our two experts, feel free to also put it in the chat. I also realized that we're getting slowly towards the end of our session, so also like to leave a bit of time for our colleague Bram to guide you a bit through what's happening on the online platform and what is the following assignment. But if you have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And if we can't reflect on them all here, we'll definitely see if we can find a way to address them further down the line in the course. So that's great. Let's see. Yeah, I think there's a large variety of discussion going on here in the chat. Some new messages here. One question was, how do you validate the information from the people before the analysis? So how do you judge, let's say, the quality of your sources? Is there something you could reflect on, maybe, Helena?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's good to remain critical, whether it's a farmer or a high-level policymaker. Is it true what they say? And the only way you can normally do that is through triangulation. Check it with other resources, with other people. Are they telling you the same story, or is this a personal opinion? It's not always easy to make a good judgment on that, I have to admit. So if you are uncertain, try to validate and triangulate. We call it when you check it with other resources or other people, if they agree to that statement.
Yeah, great. Because I think also in our work, we often see that there's quite some discussion also on a national level going on what is the quality of data and sources, and indeed having multiple perspectives on what is good quality data to be an input for your analysis helps. But also, for example, if you're working in your food system analysis, it's a lot through workshops, and that's where you try to collect a lot of data in a more qualitative way. Also make sure that a variety of stakeholders is around the table, and that you've got the smallholder representatives or the smallholder themselves at the table. Make sure that you have civil society groups at the table. Make sure that the private sector in its various forms is heard, so that you're not only getting your information just from one direction, only from government or only from research. So I think that's very helpful. I see there's quite some more comments coming in, but I think we're getting a bit to the end of our time. Happy to follow up with some of these discussions on the online platform. Thanks so much, Helena and Bram, for presenting today, for being engaged in this panel discussion. I think it was very helpful to get more clarity on what food system analysis actually is and why it can be helpful and how you can use it. So thanks a lot for that.